This show is not an attack on Black History Month. This show is for informational purposes only. But I guarantee you, some people are not going to like the little known facts that I reveal about Black History Month. There are, of course, positives and negatives to Black History Month. I mean, Black History Month provides a platform for our people to learn more about themselves. However, there are problems with Black History Month. Aside from the name itself, meaning Black History, because the term black itself is manufactured during the Atlantic slave trade. Therefore, Black history would begin with the Atlantic slave trade. But the idea of so-called Black history is to reflect the history of the so-called African diaspora, or at least it has come to mean that in people's minds today. But we're going to stick to the facts. So, according to Wikipedia, and they give a good reference, Carter G. Woodson, Negro History Week, Journal of Negro History, Volume 11, Number 2, April 1926, page 238 for anyone who wants to research further. And it refers to Negro History Week. Black History Month has its origin in Negro History Week. And it also informs us that the emphasis of the primary emphasis was placed on teaching about American so-called Black history, so-called Black American history in public schools, all right, through the Department of Education. And this is from the Journal of Negro History. And this effort was pioneered by Carter G. Woodson and the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. So now in the 60s, the word Negro became socially unacceptable, and so it eventually became celebrated as Black History Week. But the official observance of Black History Month comes in 1976, and it's I don't want to say co-opted, but yes, we're going to say co-opted in a sense by the Ford administration, and set to coincide with the United States bicentennial. The reason I had a problem saying co-opted is because, remember, it was established to teach about so-called Black American history and presented to the Department of Education, you know. So this was something that was sought to be taken on by the system. And eventually it was in 1976, according to the references that I just gave you. So you have some that will argue it includes the African history, so-called African history of the diaspora, but it wasn't intended for that. It was intended for so-called Black American history. Now, you can go to YouTube, or excuse me, you can go to Google right now and type in Black History Month. And this is what's going to happen. All right, at least this is what happens through my browser in Google. It's at the very top, it's going to say Black History Month facts, and it's by the history.com, www.history.com. And it's going to tell you right there, it has a picture of Jackie Robinson, and it says Black History Month honors the contributions of African Americans to United States history. So now this is the premise of Black History Month. Now this is the next sentence that comes after that. Did you know that Madam C.J. Walker was America's first self-made woman millionaire, or to become millionaire? Or that George Washington Carver was able to derive nearly 300 products from peanuts? All right, this is pretty much standard information. They'll teach you this pretty much in almost any school. These are some of the first facts that you're gonna come across. So now that we understand that it's about so-called Black Americans' contributions to history, and then the first thing that comes up for Black History Month in the first article, the first person that they teach you about is Madam C.J. Walker, the first self-made millionaire. But how did she get rich? And what does it say about so-called Black Americans that she was able to get rich on their psychological disease of self-hate by way of the hot comb, perm products to cause themselves to have the appearance of a European, to change their appearance to mimic the European, their former slaveholder, so much so that some even seek to acquire this straightening of hair by an approximation of blood. Yet she is venerated and she is celebrated. But remember, who is behind this Black History Month now? This is an official holiday. So this is the problem with so-called Black History Month. Number one, we have to understand what Black history is. Black history begins with so-called Black people in America during slavery. And then it evolves into the contributions of so-called Black people, regardless of how they rose to the top, regardless of how they became successful financially. So this is a very dangerous thing. Number one, because it's still in line with the materialistic attitudes of the corporate structure of exploitation. So it's still that is still weaved into the curriculum, which is supposed to empower so-called Black people. And this is the first person that you're going to hear about. Number two, it's inextricably connected with the values of integration at all costs and temporary civil rights, where you have so-called the Voters' Rights Act being renewed in 2031 and so-called blacks in a state of limbo and politically, socially, and economically, and the 14th or 13th and 14th Amendments, which are supposed to provide this pseudo-citizenship for so-called blacks, are under discussion for to put on the chopping block in political sectors. I mentioned integration because when you really think about it, so-called Black people were in a more powerful state before integration. But integration is what is taught, and whether you're for integration or not, that's up to you. But if you look at it objectively, if you just look at history, so-called Black people were more empowered when we were not integrated. We had our own institutions. We had our own systems of economics that we dealt with, and we were a closer, tight-knit community. Now, if you look at it historically, what has integration actually done? We have to begin to ask the questions. What has this history that they taught us and that they teach us is so positive that we cling to, what has it really done for us, and where are we at present because of clinging to it? And when we start to do that, then we're going to see that it's really just another ruse because it's been commercialized and it's been co-opted. Now, we know the name, we know Black itself is a misnomer because no human being is Black. It represents a chattel brand and it represents a social caste. It has, it has aesthetic and metaphysical symbolisms and importance, but in reference to nationhood, nationality, and identity, it's not a term that is viable. It's not a term that is going to benefit us, and it hasn't benefited us. It's only kept us in a legal status which is unlawful, and which leaves us in a position to be subject to all kinds of abuses of true citizens in a stateless state, so to speak. Black History Month, then, because of its intention from the onset with Carter G. Woodson, and the others who helped organize Negro History Week, from the onset came from a mindset seeking to be integrated into a public school system that did not have the so-called black population good educational welfare in mind. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Now this brings me to my next subject, Black Studies departments, because now Black history, so-called Black history, is an integrated institution. As a matter of fact, I won't even say it's an integrated institution. It's an institution inside the European institutional structure. Therefore, it is a European institution. Now, this is a harsh thing to say, but it becomes quite apparent when you challenge the status quo of Black history itself. Black Studies departments have since began to teach about the so-called African diaspora, but they carry forward an inherent need to preserve the status quo of the institutionalized form of Black history, and thus have become a hindrance to the evolution of our understanding of that history. Black Studies departments have long since fought against the term Moor and our Moorish history until such time as it has become popular, at which time they have now begun to incorporate it into the curriculum only under the auspices that Moor equates to black itself, which is not historically correct, nor can they prove it. So then why such opposition to the evolution of our understanding of our history? Well, when I was up north in the Bay Area, and I was talking to an elder sister who's been involved for a long time in the struggle, a long time in politics, and I asked her, I said, why do the so-called black politicians behave the way that they do? Why do they not help our community like other communities help their communities? Why do they not represent our interests the way they do? Why are they so, selfish, and money driven? And she told me, she said, most other politicians of other nationalities, when they come into politics, they come in for the most part as entrepreneurs. Meaning they already have something going. They already have their business. They're already operating. They're already making money. They're already good. But they actually come in as representation of their constituencies, of their communities. But when so-called black people come in and get into position, they're usually not entrepreneurs, and thus their position becomes their job and their sole source of income, and they have to fight for tooth and nail to keep the position and to keep the standards of living that they have. Now I say that the same thing is it is with the Black Studies departments. They have to maintain the status quo because their livelihood is connected with it, and thus it stagnates the understanding and the evolution of ourselves. And this takes most bearing on the understanding of our present socio-political situation and state. Now, that being said, we must begin to challenge this. We must begin to not simply allow the status quo to be maintained because it's a hindrance to ourselves and the movement. Now, on the flip side of that, we have to, those of us in the movement that are trying to uplift all of humanity and be uniters and not dividers, we need to make sure that when we approach these subjects, we approach with love, because our brothers and sisters are emotionally attached to this day like they are any other state-sponsored holiday. And so it's hard, and it's not their fault. But what we need to do is present the facts and present the information and ask the tough questions and then back up, and let it sink in and let people see for themselves. Because one thing is not going to change, and that's the condition of so-called black people in this country, until we start to understand identity and nationality and the role that it plays on and the bearing that it has on our present state. our present situation. We need to temper our message with love and help ease our brothers and sisters into consciousness instead of trying to shake their whole foundation and break them down from the onset. And don't get me wrong, sometimes this is needed, but it's not needed in every situation. It's not needed when people are open and when they're receptive and they're not combative. And sometimes we become one trick pony, so to speak, when we have this tactic of being so aggressive and coming at people on these days. Just tell the truth. Just provide the facts. Provide the information. Provide your perspective even, and then let them decide what it is that they want to take in and accept. Now, I said earlier, it does provide a platform, and therefore it does have some merit. It has become a tool, just like any other institution in the United States. And it depends on us on how we use that tool to help elevate the consciousness of our people. And again, like I said, oftentimes this comes by challenging the status quo. That means you black student unions out there, you know, at the collegiate level, at the university level, in your home schools, everyone that's out there teaching, you need to teach on the truth of black history, teach on the origin of black history, and teach on, if you don't know, learn about more, learn about the term, learn about your Moorish history, and teach on that. All right? Because really, the education is in your hands. It's on you. And it's on lawful citizens and lawful people to take control of these institutions and help usher in a new day of consciousness. I leave you. I'll always leave you for the most part. Thank you for tuning in. Peace, love, all the above.